Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. It is great to see you. Yeah, it's good. We're into July. This is, I think, the 2-year anniversary weekend of being in this space. And so, yeah, it's exciting. And Michelle still uses, we invited some people who are part of our church to check this place out before we committed to it. Some of you were there, and Michelle still uses in social media, you'll see a picture, and it looks kind of like this room, but it's just concrete floor, and there's some like construction rubble around, and we're in a big oval here, praying about it. Is this going to be the right space for us? And it was rough at that time. There were mice who were unafraid to join the prayer meeting. So we still occasionally see a mouse. They're now afraid, so that's changed. So they'll scurry away. Underneath this, before they put the carpet down, we came in and prayed, and people were able to write messages. And so sometimes when I'm up here, I remember that, right? So it's exciting. So these anniversaries, it's good. Today, one of the two of the most stressful parts of my life as a pastor, naming sermons, brutal. I just can't do it. So that's why we're just going through Matthew, because I can just say Matthew, right? We're just talking about Matthew, like title done. And then today, the dark shadow in my life was Gavin, who's a wonderful guy, but today, he's not. He says, you need to come in, and I got to write this little thing for Facebook, right? So, I'm like, dude, like you're ruining everything. So today's sermon is Show and Tell. And it just says, you guys remember Show and Tell growing up, right? Where you come to class one day and you bring something, and I don't know, sometimes everybody does it, sometimes it's just your day. And I feel like in maybe first grade or kindergarten, you also brought treats or something. I feel like I brought Jell-O a lot. Finger Jell-O was a thing. I don't know if it was popular, but I brought that a lot. I haven't had finger Jell-O in probably 40 years, maybe. So that's not a request. I'm not asking for it. I don't want trays of finger Jell-O on our porch. But so Show and Tell. So like this is a little guy that folds into a blue piece of cheese that watches over the tech booth right there. So that's my Show and Tell for today. This will make sense in a moment, Show and Tell. I'm going to put this over here. You can keep an eye on me and the worship team. If I can get him to stand, he'll sit instead. All right, let me pray. Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for your word and this chance just to learn more about it. I pray you speak to me and through me and to all of us. We want to know more about what you have for us. In your holy name, amen. Well, before we get into our passage, we're going to continue in Matthew. Before we get into our passage, I want to talk about something that will make me sound probably nerdy. That's okay. But one of the things that I think is interesting to think about is how we think or how we know things. We actually know things in a variety of ways, and that's important. I think we're designed to do that. And here's a few examples. Like sometimes people ask, someone will say a fact, and you're like, how do you know that? My father-in-law has this incredible vocabulary. And in the past, I doubted him. And so he would say words, and I'm like, you made that up. And then, no, I didn't. Well, define it. And he would define, well, spell it. And then I would go fact check, and he was always right. So I gave up that game. So I just don't do that anymore. My vocabulary is pretty limited. But sometimes when someone says something, you're like, how do you know that, right? And even yourself, how do I know something? And sometimes we respond with something, well, I know that I know, or I've researched it, or the experts say. And now that we have access to all the information in the world, we also have access to experts who contradict each other dramatically with similar qualifications, and so it's hard, right? It's hard to know things. But we have these different ways where we come to a safe or confident conclusion, this is what I know to be true or accurate. But here's a few ways that we know things. Our senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. I know something tastes good to me. I know something looks attractive to me or sounds good to me. Those of you who like country music have a broken sense, right? So that's sad for you. Just kidding. We have different ways that we can sense the same thing very differently. So I know this sounds good to me, and that sounds bad to me, and we know these things differently. Reason. We're given a mind. We're to love the Lord our God with all our mind. And sometimes we forget that, right? But that is a God-given gift. Our brains are God-given to think logically, to deduce, to look at evidence and make good decisions based on what we see, what we know. Emotions are part of how we know things. They're a big part of how we know things, particularly when we're establishing the meaning or the value of something. At one point, I don't know where this thing came from. I have no idea. It just showed up. But there was probably some kid somewhere who thought this was the bee's knees, right? Like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then sometime later knew that it wasn't, right? So what we think is important changes, but it's our emotions that give value and meaning to lots of things. These things mean a lot. Some of you know that I do long runs, and my first really big challenge was the Grand Canyon. And my friend, so we did a double crossing in one day, went back and forth. I do not recommend doing that. It was an awesome day, but not for everyone to do. And I was like a quarter way through this. I'm like, people shouldn't do this. Like, this is not, the Park Service recommends you don't, and they're wise to recommend that you don't do what we did. Anyway, one of the questions my friend was asking, should I use hiking poles? I said, definitely you should use hiking poles. He just said the other day, if he had not purchased hiking poles and someone offered to sell him a pair for $1,000, he would have gladly paid for it. Like that, those things have incredible physical and emotional meaning to him now. So this emotions are how we give meaning and value. When our daughter was little, she had this blanket, and it was tan. It was sort of the texture of like the old classic long underwear, like kind of dimpled fabric. And it was 2-ply, and it just got used and ratty. So much so there were holes. It got so twisted inside of itself you couldn't make it right. I washed it once and ruined it. Like, she's like, what did you do to this thing, right? To me, it's a gross old blanket. To her, it's a precious blankie, right? Necessary for sleep and rest and comfort. That's an emotional thing. She knew it was important. Language helps us define and categorize what we sense and experience. Memory is part of how we know. We remember things. We don't remember things exactly as they happen. We remember how we remember them, and those things change, those memories change and get attitude. But the build over time. Memory is part of how we know. Intuition. Call it what you will, sense of the Holy Spirit, whatever it might be. Sometimes we have a strong sense without real evidence, right? We just kind of know this doesn't feel right, or this feels really good, and I'm not sure. Years ago, I was working at a Christian school in southern Missouri, and I was a hall director, and in January, the hall director of the toughest hall on campus comes in, and he has his resignation letter, moving trucks loaded, I'm out of here. I was put in charge of that. This hall, its first year in existence, took its hall picture in front of the county jail. Like, this was a Christian school. We joked that, like, those adopt a highway things, like, they didn't need to do it in the summer because those people weren't around, because they're just bad, right? Just bad guys. So I'm getting put in charge of this, and then they're hiring someone. We're in the hiring process. It's kind of mid-semester, and I had to miss one meeting for some reason. And then one interview. We're talking about him later on. The vice president connected with this guy, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. I had something about this, and I had my reasons, but ultimately it didn't feel right. They hired him, and a month later, he was gone. Terrible fit, terribly unhealthy person. Sometimes you just know things, and you're like, I don't know why. Sometimes we know things, and we're wrong, right? So when people say, like, just follow your heart, that is bad advice, right? Most of us have a story like, yeah, nope, I should not do that. But sometimes we have this strong sense. So our intuition, faith is believing. It's being confident of something without seeing it, without empirical evidence or logical proof. As a Christian, I have to accept this. I can come to some proofs of some things, right? Bree just sent us a video of some really important discovery in Israel. Michelle went to Israel with Howard a few years ago, and the tour guide said that it's brutal to build anything because every time you start digging, you uncover 3 or 4 layers of important sites. So it's just everywhere is something important. So we have these proofs. And those things add to my belief, but they're not how I got started, right? The foundation of my faith in Jesus is faith. It's hope that this is true, but I can't prove it. Faith is part of how I know, but it's not provable in that sense. And the scientific method, it's another one. We test and we retest. It's not fact until it's observable and repeatable. Science and reason are good and important. But they're little help when we make some of our most important decisions. Our most important decisions are not based on science or fact. Like who to marry, who to trust, whether or not to plant a church in a town where you don't know anyone, right? In those cases, we look more to faith or intuition. We know things in a variety of ways. When we were first making, many of you have heard this story, so I won't go at length, but when we were first making the decision to come, the process was kind of long and then short. We kind of heard about it, we talked about it, we visited the cross, we prayed about it, and then we had a bunch of stuff going on. We were very busy that summer, and then when we came back together, we were like, should we do that? Yep. And then after we kind of started announcing it, people began to say things like, well, that makes total sense. And we look back, and then people would say things like, your lives have clearly been pointing you in this direction, preparing you for this. And we look back at history and thought, okay, it does make sense. But that is not what got us here. That's not what got us moving in the same direction. So we know or moving in this direction. We know things in a variety of ways. This, I think, will be important background for the text. So if we can get into that, let's read this. So we're talking about Jesus and John the Baptist, and the next couple messages will be about John the Baptist. Matthew 11, 1-6. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. And when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? And Jesus answered them, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. And Gavin, you can just leave the first slide up, the first slide from this text. So a couple weeks ago, Dave talked about the harvest, where the harvest is ready. And then last week we talked about what Jesus said to his disciples as he sends them out on their first kind of practicum experience. Go and minister. Go and do the things, say the things that you've seen me do and say. Go do that. But it's a warning shot, right? Like, this is going to be tough. There's a lot of tough things that are going to happen. You might be received well. You might be received very poorly. Right? This can be a tough thing. So he is kind of level setting the expectations. So they've gone, and the disciples are on their way, and Jesus continues his work. And the next thing we see in Matthew's telling is John is in prison. Kind of confirming what he's just said to his disciples, right? Like, John was great. Greater than all you dudes, right? And the disciples would be like, yeah, John's way better than we are, right? So John is in prison, so he confirms that. He's been put in prison by Herod Antipas. We're going to talk about this in a couple weeks, so there'll be more details about his prison experience. But Herod is sometimes called King Herod. He was a tetrarch, kind of a governor, so to speak, and he ruled the region. He was a Jewish puppet of the Roman Empire. Again, Rome would do that. As their empire is expanding, they would put locals in charge to rule. It was just easier. They didn't have enough Romans to go around. So these were, in this case, this was a Jewish guy who was more loyal to Rome than to Jerusalem. Sometimes you'll read in the Gospels a reference to the Herodians. These are upper echelon Jews who had kind of sold out and were maybe kind of politically, kind of historically, but not really Jewish, but not really practicing Jews. And they were more connected to kind of what Rome had to offer than being faithful to God. So the Herodians are these people that would be kind of the opposite of the Pharisees. So the Pharisees have this reputation of being bad, and I get why. But their heart is right, like for the most part, for some of it. Israel's story had been one of unfaithfulness and faithfulness, unfaithfulness and faithfulness. And so eventually God kind of removes himself, kind of backs off, and now they're living as refugees, second-class citizens in their promised land. So the Pharisees are trying to get Israel back on track. And so they're the exact opposite of the Herodians. But they both hated Jesus and John. So sometimes, like, we realize we kind of loop back, right? And we're not all that different. So these are the Herodians. These are people who are kind of aligned with Herod. John criticized Herod for marrying his brother's wife. He divorced his own wife, married his brother's wife, and John kind of was a kamikaze. He just didn't care. He's going to say what he thinks is right. He doesn't care who thinks what. He is all sold out. And so Herod didn't like this and was embarrassed by this because John wouldn't shut up, and so he puts him in prison. And now when you read the Gospels, another problem is chronology is hard. So the Gospels put this prison experience, prison term in different places. So it's hard to know when in Jesus' ministry it happened. They're roughly the same age. John is 6 months older, something like that. His ministry probably has started just maybe a few months before Jesus is. They usually started around 30 years old. So John has been doing his thing for a while. We don't know where John's prison term falls in the kind of the time of Jesus' ministry. So it's hard to know. He's in prison 6 to 10 months, kind of depending on which commentary you read. Probably not a whole year. And it seems that he conducted his ministry from prison. We see this even in Paul. Paul is in prison and people can visit him. They can bring him scrolls. He can write letters. So this seems to happen. Prison is never great, but there was some freedoms allowed to some people. And so the disciples were able to visit John, and he sends them back to Jesus. Are you the one? Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? This is an interesting moment, one we should take encouragement from. John knew Jesus from the womb. Remember from the very beginning of the Gospels. Mary is pregnant and goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who has been pregnant a few months. She's a little bit ahead of her. And as she approaches, John leaps in his mom's womb. He recognizes the Messiah from then. So he knew who he was. When Jesus comes to be baptized, John recognizes him right away. He knows his cousin. He knows who he is. He knows what he's, not just I recognize him as a relative, but I recognize who you are. You're the Messiah. And now he's wondering, why is he unsure of Jesus now? I think there's a few possibilities. Fact is, even for us now, Jesus isn't what people envisioned. He's not always what we want, and certainly then he was quite different from what John expected. His ministry style was quite different from John's in some ways. I think John sensed his end was coming. He knew it was his job to pave the way for the Messiah, and he wanted to know he had succeeded. Perhaps maybe he was wrong about Jesus, and it's someone else, and I've got to figure out how to get out of prison so I can do my job and make way the path of the Lord. John was also human. He was a great human, to be true, to be fair. But he was a human. Perhaps he began to doubt. Prison can do that to a person, right? I'm encouraged by this. I'm encouraged by someone as great as John the Baptist. If he can doubt, if he can have questions and be unsure, then and Jesus can forgive and nurture and develop and still partner with him, that he can do that with me too. I think later on, Thomas was encouraged by this story as well. John had seen it all, and yet now he is unsure. Sometimes I am too. Much of my life, I became a Christian in the kind of mid-'80s. That was a weird time, one of the great eras of music, but a lot of other weird stuff going on. Christendom was obsessed with Satan and the end times. Those were our big things. People carried their Bible and This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti, hand in hand. And that was just kind of what we were obsessed with. And so there was even a book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. And then the same guy wrote a book for 1989. If Jesus doesn't know, why are we bothering trying to figure out, right? But much of my life, I have heard these messages. Jesus is coming back soon. Jesus is coming soon. It's imminent. To be fair, One reason why the Gospels weren't written until decades after Jesus ascended into heaven is the disciples thought he was coming back any moment too. It's one of my biggest beasts with God. It's like, what are you waiting for? Like, this thing has been falling apart from the beginning. Like, how much worse do we have to get as humans before you say enough? Like, I don't know. It's a tough thing. So I get what it's like to kind of wonder, to ask some questions, and I'm encouraged by John. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians, "If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied." In other words, the joke's on us if we're wrong about Jesus. And that's a part of faith, right? We can't know for sure. We can't prove this stuff. Definitely can't prove that we can't prove something's going to happen before it's happened. There's an element of faith, which means there's an element to not knowing. Next week, we'll see Jesus refer to John the Baptist as the greatest human ever up to that point. Bigger than Abraham, Moses, and David. And yet John wondered, which means I can too. See, John's sense of knowing had come into question. He knew his calling, but his faith, his intuition was wavering. So he sought a different source of truth, a different way of knowing. How can I know? I want to know this. Sometimes one way of knowing gets us moving in the right direction, but then we need to add to it. When I became a Christian, I've said this before, we went to church, I was comfortable with church, and then one day a friend invites me, come with me in my youth group. I didn't really know what a youth group was, but we went on a bus with the youth pastor. Never done that before. We went to a camp. It was a week-long camp, but the youth group would sometimes just go to the Wednesday service when they typically had youth group. And I don't have much recollection of what happened in the service, but there was an altar call and I went forward, and that's when I began following Jesus. That's it. I don't really have much to tell you. I cried. I'm not a huge crier. My youth pastor's wife, Sandy, prayed for me, or with me, and I'm really grateful for that. Every few years, I'll send her a thank you on Facebook. Thank you for doing that. Appreciate that. But there's no logic to it. I just did it. My heart was moved. Since then, I've learned a lot about the Bible, about Jesus, about the historical validity to the stuff, and those things have added to my faith, but they're not the foundation of my faith. When my faith is wavered, I sometimes go back to those other sources of truth, and I'm reminded of things, and it gets me back into feeling and believing and sensing in different ways. So sometimes we need multiple kinds of sources of truth, multiple ways of knowing, and sometimes one way of knowing gets us moving, and other ways of knowing begin to add to that and bolster that, make it stronger. Again, we make some of our biggest decisions based on emotion, intuition, and not facts. And then later on we go, oh yeah, that does make sense now. Moving on. This is Jesus' response to his disciples. Jesus answered them, go. So he's speaking to John's disciples, not his own. So John's disciples. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up. And the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Jesus points John's disciples to stories. The Bible is 60% narrative. It's history. It's stories. Because that's the best way to communicate truth. That's why we do story problems, like this horrible subject of math that we force on people's throats when they're kids. It's just cruel, because math is mean. We teach it in story problems, right? This is a way to make it useful to you. Like, this is why you might need it. Someday you might need to know how many apples can drive a train heading into another train, right? Right? It's important stuff. So he points them to stories. There's stories of healing, stories of rescue, stories of resurrection. There's stories of good news given to people who rarely hear an uplifting word or thought. These stories would have been verifiable then. Go. You've heard the stories. Tell John the stories. If you want, travel around. Most of Jesus' ministry was in a relatively small area. Go and talk to people. You heard about the little girl that was raised from the dead. Go talk to her family and her neighbors. Go talk to her. Go talk to the blind guy, the formerly blind guy. Go ask. Go ask. Go see the people whose lives haven't changed. They're not wealthier, but they're hopeful. They belong. Those people who have received the good news, the poor, are in God's sight too. The Bible is full of proofs like this. God says, go look at the stories. We don't get a 3-point outline to prove God exists or that Jesus really rose from the dead. We don't get that. We don't have a video. And now who would trust a video anyway, right? There probably will be a video of Jesus resurrecting soon. And it will not be real, but someone will believe it. Just like there was a meme years ago. Everything on the internet is accurate. Signed, Abraham Lincoln. Right? Sometimes the answer to our question is another question. Or sometimes it's just replaced by another question. One that replaces what we thought was our question with the real one. Do you exist becomes, do you see me? Do you care? Or do I matter? And Jesus ends his message to John's disciples. Blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Blessed is the one who tells the stories. Paul speaks often of rejoicing in his weakness. And you're like, what? Let me tell you a story. I was a mess. This part of my life was falling apart. Jesus changed it. Jesus healed it. Jesus resurrected it. Jesus spoke good news to my despair. Let me tell you about that. The story's only interesting because I was in despair and now I'm full of hope. I'm full of purpose. Blessed is the one who's not afraid to tell those stories. Blessed is the one who doesn't care about how people react to the stories. Blessed are those who know in a deep, deep way. Many of the stories of Jesus healing someone go like this. They're desperate, which means they're often considered cursed. I'm always hesitant to mention a TV show that we watch because there's always the possibility of some scene that I forgot. So if this offends you, I apologize. But there's a show, I think on Netflix, starring Ted Danson. It's called Man on the Inside. And it's about aging. And he's retired, he's a widower, and he's just kind of lonely and just kind of floating. And he gets this opportunity to be the man on the inside. Someone has come to a private investigator, and his mom lives in this kind of upper-class nursing home, I think in San Francisco. And someone's been stealing jewelry, nice, expensive jewelry. And so they want to hire someone to sign up to move in as a patient, as a resident of this nursing home, but to investigate. So Ted Danson is the man on the inside. And these are all fairly wealthy people. It's a very nice home, and there is a memory care wing. And everyone's afraid of that. Like, as you get older, things get real, right? Like, just the body starts falling apart, things change, whatever. And so there's some real things that older people begin thinking about. And so they just kind of they steer clear of that wing. They don't want to go on that wing. And one of the women, she is showing signs of dementia. And if you've known someone who suffered with that, it's a brutal thing. The long goodbye, right? It's just a slow fade of a personality. And it's hard on everyone. Well, in this nursing home, what Ted discovers is when someone starts showing those signs, everyone starts pulling away. Almost as if dementia is contagious, right? Like, we don't know how to interact. They begin doing strange things. It changes their relationship, and so they begin pulling away, which makes it worse, particularly for that particular person, right? That's what we do when people fall into the sort of cursed category. We pull away. We do that to people we can't help and don't understand. And yet, these are the kinds of people Jesus went to, right? Tell that's a great story. It's a beautiful story. Tell that. Some of us have been that way. Maybe we wouldn't suffer for something that was gross or uncomfortable for people to see, but in our hearts we felt just cursed. And then Jesus showed up in ways that are undeniable. We just kind of know that we know. That's a great story. Frederick Buechner is one of my favorite authors, and you've heard me say this before. As long as you go to Bluffs, you'll hear me say it again. Buechner describes these people as being seen by Jesus. So incredibly seen, he says. These cursed people that are pulling away and we're pulling away from them, people we don't know what to do with, Jesus goes to them. He sees them and he goes to them. Tell John that story. And if you're not sure, go verify that story and see how being seen changed those lives. He often heals them and then tells them to tell no one, but they disobey. Either because they can't contain themselves or because they're being interrogated. And they often respond with something like this: I don't know exactly who did this. I don't know who this guy was. They might not even know his name. But I do know this: I was blank and now I'm blank. That's what I know. I was blind and now I see. I was cursed by my neighbors and family and now I'm welcomed back into the home, into the synagogue. I was lost and now I'm found. Go and tell John the stories of the unseen who know they are seen by me. In the 70s and 80s, another thing that was happening in Christendom was this need to defend, in which it's always, apologetics is what that's called, this desire to be able to argue and prove Jesus or prove God's existence or whatever. And there was a time I was like, I think I might want to go into that. So I was considering studying philosophy. You all know I'm not smart enough for that. But for a while I thought I might be. I was going to do that. I was going to be an apologete. Notice the profound lack of apologetics in this. Here's the story. You can do with it what you want, but I know that I know. There's freedom in that, isn't there? Many of us worry we don't sound smart enough. And I think it's good to try to have, as I said earlier, we worship the Lord, we love the Lord with our minds. It's good to have smart answers, intelligent answers to tough questions. People want to know how things work. But for most of us, when I say most of us, not just here, most of us, those big things, doesn't come down to that. So don't worry about it. That's my thought. Don't worry about it. Tell your story. Live your story. Most of us aren't called to preach or to be vocational ministers. For every one of me, there is a bunch of you, right? We're not all called to do this. We are called to make disciples, and we are called, as John's disciples were, to tell the story. Instead, we're called to live as the new creation we are. We let our life speak. In other words, this is what I have seen and heard. I was blank, and now I'm blank. Worship team, if you want to come up. We're going to sing Turn Your Eyes on Jesus. Place is important. As we sing this song, I encourage you to remember a time and a place when you were sure of him. Maybe you're not right now, but you can look back. And I was sure. And maybe you have several of those. And if you think about it, there might be different ways that you were sure. There are many examples of people in the Bible going to places where they knew that they knew. So just think about that. We're going to go to Michigan this next week and visit my dad, and I'll go to the town where I grew up, and I'll see some places that were key moments in my young faith. And I'll get a chance to thank him. Right? Thank him today. As you turn your eyes on Jesus, you remember those times where you knew that you knew. Thank him. Does that make all the problems and worries go away? No, of course not. But it does give some perspective. And if we can be sure of Jesus there, and then we can be sure of Jesus here and now. And that story can make all the difference in the world for us. And that person in your circle that you're called to share the story with. We are all called to make disciples, and the harvest has always been ready. We've always needed more people who will just tell the story. You don't have to prove it. You just tell the story. This is what happened. This is what happened in my friend's life. This is what happened in my family. This is what happened in my spouse's life. Well, I don't know if I believe that. That's fine. You don't have to. I do. Right? And this is how it changed me. And just let God work through that. Just tell the stories. He didn't give John's disciples 3 points. This is how you prove. Nope, he just said tell the stories. So let's think of a story. Let's remember a story. Let's thank God for a story. And let's turn our eyes on Jesus.